it's Ace. Before we get to this week's edition of the Ace at Large podcast, you'll see we got some fancy banners behind us. I'm wearing a jacket to cover up my t-shirt that I'm wearing underneath this. We've done a lot of work here to make the Ace at Large podcast spectacular. All we need now is you. We need you and your stories of what you're going through in life, how you're coping with things in life, what you've overcome in life, and any advice that you may have to make lives better for everybody else who may be experiencing something similar. So all the information is down here on the screen. Want you to go, send me a message, check it out, and hope you enjoy this week's Ace at Large podcast.
This is the Radio Button Network. And this is the new Ace at Large podcast. Now, your host, Ace.
So we're all here because we're going through something, whatever that may be. And this podcast kind of came to be in its current form following the death of my daughter 8 months ago. And we've tried to spread out over the course of the past few weeks and talk about a variety of things, some of them inspirational, sharing some stories of healing that people have been through, and stories of people who turn their lives around to become successful and help others. Today, we're kind of back to where we all started with a story of grief, but not just someone who's grieving and someone who's dealing with a terrible experience, someone who is taking that terrible experience and trying to use it to help others, such as me and you, if you're going through something similar. It's a very inspirational story from a very young person. I want you to meet somebody that I was introduced to. This is Lexi. Is it okay if you use your full name?
Yeah.
Is that okay? I should have asked you that before we started. This is Lexi Faith. And how old are you?
I'm 18.
And relatively recent 18, is that right?
April 2nd.
Okay, so you just turned 18. And it's a hard story for anybody, but especially for someone, I would think, at such a young age. Because I think back to when I was 16, 17, 18, I thought I had a lot of cares and worries in life, and I was living up in my small town of Pineville, Louisiana, having a great time. I was 18 when I went to college at LSU in Baton Rouge, having a great time, just trying to get through day to day and all that kind of good stuff. But you had a little bit of a different situation, because how old were you when you moved to New York?
I was 16.
All right. At the age of 16, you moved to New York. Now, did you go alone? Were you living with a family there? Did your family members go with you? How'd that work?
Well, so it was family friends, basically. They were like really good friends of mine, but so my family knew them very well, and they became my roommates. And so I lived with two other people for about 2 years.
So people you knew and you could trust. And you moved to New York to pursue acting.
I did.
Okay. And you just got out of a really bad relationship.
Yeah.
At the age of 16.
Yeah.
How long had that relationship lasted?
Like 9 months.
Okay.
It was really bad.
And if you don't mind my asking, what was was it working or?
Just very an unhealthy, toxic, manipulative relationship.
Maybe it's a generational thing. It always baffles me. I think about people that I dated and went out with or whatever at 16. It's like there was nobody. Maybe they were, and I was just too blind to see that were there toxic relationships when I was 16. I don't know if there were or not. I wasn't in any of them. But so you met someone in New York. How soon after moving there?
Well, it was a slow transition for my family, for me moving there. So I would go for a few months, and I'd come back to North Carolina and be here for a little while. But I fully moved at the end of September.
Okay.
And I wasn't supposed to come back to North Carolina until Christmas. So I met Yanni like October 10th, like the first week in October. So I just fully moved there. So maybe a few weeks.
So are you there? You're there pursuing an acting career? Are you there acting classes?
All of the above.
Full on.
Yeah, training, auditioning, everything.
Great. Broadway
and film and TV.
Okay. Were you having any success at that point?
Yeah, I had just signed with an agency, or like within this amount of time, I had just signed with my first agents, and so everything was starting to pick up a bit, and it was a lot to handle.
Sounds super exciting to me. You're 16 years old.
Yeah.
You're in New York. You have an agency. You're pursuing your dream career. You're acting.
Yes.
Things are starting to move forward, and then you meet a guy.
Yeah.
Now, did you know immediately there's something about this guy. Like there was a spark, something, whatever.
Yeah, because the way we met was really weird. I met him at a park. Like, first of all, you don't go to New York and talk to people. Like, you don't talk to strangers.
Right.
So, yeah, we were at the park and he was skateboarding and he and I just started a conversation and like that, we were just...
You knew it right away.
We both knew, yeah.
And then from October of 2019, everything's progressing. You've got Yanni. You're hitting it off. You spend a lot of time together.
Yeah, we were together like every single day.
The career's moving forward.
Yep.
Everything is just about as good as it could be.
Yeah, everything's just falling into place. It was probably like the happiest I've been.
And then March of 2020 comes along and there's
yep.
COVID and the world shuts down, especially in New York.
Yeah. So my parents pulled me back to North Carolina because of COVID. And so whenever Yanni and I told each other...
Yeah, I guess no reason for you to stay in New York because there's no Broadway, there are no classes, there's nothing. Everything is shut down.
It was really crazy whenever it all happened.
Yeah.
And it was within a day. My parents called me one day and said, "You're coming home tomorrow." Like, it was really fast.
And I can't blame them. Let's get everybody home because that New York at the time you were hearing really so many stories. Let's get her out of there and get her settled.
Yeah, but with that, we just thought, okay, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Like, that's how our goodbye went. We didn't take it seriously. We were like, all right, bye, see ya. Like, I'll be back in like a week and a half.
Okay.
And so obviously I come back to North Carolina and just the pandemic happens and I don't go back for months.
Yeah.
So it was crazy.
I think we all were in the same boat.
Yeah.
I remember telling my son and I take this baseball trip every year. We've been doing it since he was 6. We go to one different major league ballpark every year.
Okay.
And we were supposed to go to Chicago last year to see the White Sox play. The trip was set, locked in. I'd already set up everything. It was ready to go. And in March, he was like, "Do you think we'll be able to go?" I'm like, "Yeah, dude, this thing will be over." It's like the flu kind of thing. It'll be over by probably end of May. No problem. We're not going until the 3rd week of June.
Little did we know.
Little did we know. So while you're home, you talking every day, obviously texting.
Yeah, we FaceTimed all the time. Even whenever I was in the city, if we weren't together in person and I wasn't working or he wasn't working, we were on the phone all the time.
Okay.
So.
And when did you realize there was a problem?
Well, whenever he and I first met, he had like knee and leg problems, but like I said, he was a skateboarder. He was like very physically active. So we just figured it was some kind of skateboarding accident. And so he had broken his ankle the spring before, and he'd had to have like a reconstruction surgery kind of thing. They put some pins and things in his ankle, whatever. But he kept complaining with it hurting, and he's a very strong person. He has a very high pain tolerance. He was in the Marines, so he's just a very strong human being. And I was like, if you're complaining about it this much, clearly it's bothering you. You need to go to the doctor. And so the doctors were just basically like, we don't know what's going on. It seems fine. And then it started swelling a bit more. And that's when I was like, there really is something wrong. You need to continue to go until they give you answers.
So you are home, but still, all in all, life seems pretty positive. Other than the pandemic, your career was just progressing on a great path at the time. You've gone to New York to take on the world. So far, you're winning.
Yeah.
You've met this guy, and not only is your professional career great, your personal life is great. You stopped to come home for the pandemic, and then you finally insisted, hey, you need to go to see a doctor.
Right.
Obviously, this is where the story takes a turn. And obviously, it's a tragic turn, or Lexi wouldn't be here today. What she has experienced and how she wants her story to be able to help you and me and all others like us, coming up next.
There's more of the new Ace at Large podcast next.
The Ace and TJ family is always on your phone on the Papa John's Ace and TJ app. Available at the Apple App Store, Google Play, and Amazon Marketplace.
Welcome back to the new Ace at Large podcast.
So, you're meeting today a really special young lady. Her name is Lexi Faith, and she has been through quite a bit. If you missed any part of the earlier story, at the age of 16, she moved from North Carolina to New York to pursue acting, and it was going great. She gets to New York. She gets in classes. She signs with an agency. She wants to work on Broadway, and everything's going well. In addition to just how well her professional career was going, her personal life takes off when she meets in October of 2019 a guy by the name of Yanni. And like you said, the minute you met him, you knew something was different. It was a spark.
Yeah.
You both felt that it was great.
Mm-hmm.
Then March comes, March 2020, a year ago, a little over a year ago now, and obviously COVID shuts everything down. You have to come home because there is no Broadway, there are no classes, there's no agency, there's no nothing. Everything comes to a screeching halt. And Broadway still hasn't resumed yet, have they?
No, not yet.
And you have to come home.
Right.
See you in a couple weeks, Yanni.
Yeah.
You FaceTime all the time. You're constantly talking to him anyway. That relationship is not slowing down. And he's having a nagging knee pain. And finally, the first week of April 2020 comes, and you had been insisting, you've got to go figure out what this is.
Yeah.
Everybody thought it was just something related to a skateboarding accident and a reconstructive ankle surgery he'd had before and that kind of thing. Just one of the hazards of being a skateboarder.
Yep.
And what did they find out in April of 2020?
So they did an x-ray, and they found that he had a fractured kneecap and a fractured pelvis. And so he called me and told me, and I was like, that's weird. Clearly there's something in the middle of those two things that caused that to happen. And so they do another type of scan or another type of test, and that's when they find that he has a tumor on his femur.
So they realized the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, he's got a fractured pelvis and a fractured kneecap. There's got to be something that's causing this to be happening. Right. And it's a tumor on his femur.
Right.
Wow. So any idea at that point how long that had been there, or just?
We had no idea.
And what was their first diagnosis? Like what stage was he in, that kind of thing?
So they diagnosed him with stage 2 osteosarcoma. And they said that he got the cancer because he was born with some rare kind of disease that's more common in males.
Okay.
But because he was born with this rare disease, it makes him more susceptible to getting this type of cancer. So he could have had this tumor or this whole problem for years and just have no idea.
So then how quickly does this progress? We're April of 2020, so a year ago.
Yeah. So a few days later, he goes back to the doctor, and they did another scan just to check the tumor, and it had doubled in size a few days later.
In just a couple days?
Yeah.
2, 3 days, 4 days, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously they want to start chemo right away.
Yeah.
But it's April of 2020.
Yep.
And now the pandemic is in full swing, and he lives in New York.
Yep.
And as weird as things were here in the mothership market of Charlotte, as we call it, in New York, it was a completely different world.
It was crazy.
How long was it before he was actually able to start chemo?
Like 4 months. It was a really long time.
Wow.
And so within that time, his leg continued to swell more and more, and he was confined to his bed, basically. He couldn't move. So.
How old was he?
He was 19.
So 19.
Yeah.
Knowing now he has cancer, and every day that ticks off, he gets worse and worse and worse. He's now an active guy, a skateboarder, confined to his bed now because this tumor has gotten so bad, just waiting to start chemo.
Yeah.
So he finally starts chemo 4 months later.
Yep.
And what happens after that? Is there a success at all?
So the doctors had told him that there was success and that it was shrinking the tumors and everything was going to be fine and all of this. But we just we didn't really like the oncologist at the time. We had like a weird feeling about the whole hospital, and they weren't good at scheduling him for chemo sessions and stuff like that. So he was able to switch to the best cancer hospital in New York. So once he switched there, that took a long time as well.
Yeah.
They had to compare notes. They had to do their own tests and compare them to the tests of the other hospital. Whenever they did that, they realized that the other hospital had basically lied to him, and it was not getting better. It was getting a lot worse, actually.
Oh.
So.
And now it's spreading. They realize it's all over his body now.
So he had the tumor in his femur, and he had a tumor in his pelvis that showed up within a few months of him not doing the chemo, like before he was able to start. And then I think by the time he was able to start the chemo, that's whenever they also found the tumors in his lungs and like along his rib cage and stuff. But they were very small compared to the other ones.
But still spread all over his body.
Yeah, so he was stage 4.
What was it like for you, in a way, forced to be away from him, but trying to be supportive and experience this with this guy who's the love of your life?
Yeah, it was really hard. Just knowing that everything I'd taken for granted at that point, I think that was the worst part of it, is knowing that, oh, we used to go to the park all the time, we used to skateboard together. And like still at that point though, he was very positive about it. He was like, I'm going to get through this. Like we're going to go back to the way we used to be. But I just missed everything. And I was so sad.
And it continues month after month after month after month.
Yeah.
No improvement.
No break.
It just is what it is. You can't see him because he's in New York.
Right.
You're in North Carolina. And then we get to January 6th of this year.
Yeah.
And he calls and tells you what?
So he calls my mom, actually. And he called my mom and told her that the doctors gave him some bad news and he can't tell me. And he wants her to tell me. And I was supposed to leave to go back to New York the next day.
Really?
And my mom was like, you need to let me know if you can tell her tonight or not, because I'm not going to send her back to New York without knowing this information. And so the next day rolls around, and they had already decided that I wasn't going to go back, and I didn't know. And he called my mom the next day and was like, I can't tell her. I need you to tell her for me. And so my mom told me that his doctors had given him 3 to 6 months to live at that point. So
what was that like for you?
It was terrible. It was one of the most like hit you in the face moments. Like this whole situation is extremely strange, and like you hear people have this kind of story and stuff, and you're like, oh, that'll never happen to me. But then once it did, and then I get hit with the timestamp. It's like you're looking at it. Here's what it is.
Yeah.
But then also in our heads, we were like, okay, we could have more than 6 months. But then in my head, I was like, we could not even have 3 months. So I just have to do the best I can do with the time we've got, basically.
Yeah. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. I think I'm taken most by the turn the story takes.
Yeah.
You go from at 16, you move to New York, and immediately things are so positive.
Yep.
You know, you've got a career that's beginning. You've signed with an agency. Everything is moving in a positive direction. Oh, and then on top of that, as if that wasn't great enough, you meet this guy who's the love of your life, and everything is like, rarely do people have that kind of situation where it comes together and it's so wonderful. And then when COVID happens, takes the career away. Yep. And then within months, suddenly the relationship is in this unknown world of cancer. Yeah. And now, like you said, it's been time-stamped. You got 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And you went back.
I did.
To be with him.
Yeah. So at this point, so I had to go back to New York, but I had to quarantine for like 4 days, and I had to get the COVID test and everything. Right. So I couldn't go see him immediately. But within those days that I was quarantining, he was at the hospital. And for a few months prior to that, our communication had just kind of died off. He was so sick that he slept 22 hours a day. Like he was always on the phone, but he just didn't talk to me. So then having to deal with knowing that this person isn't the person that I fell in love with, that was really difficult. And then being in this relationship that's still a healthy relationship, but I'm just not getting the benefits of being in that relationship anymore. But it's like it's my best friend. Like I can't just leave. If I just leave, you're gonna die, and I'm just gonna be gone. Or I can stay and watch you die. Like it's just a really tough battle in my head.
It's interesting. You mentioned you're in this relationship, but he's not the same person.
Yeah.
Which has to be difficult for you because you can't. Like you can't hold it against him because
Yeah.
he's not the same. It's not like he changed because he decided to change.
Right.
This is the last thing that he, would want in his life. So that's got to be hard. The level of understanding you had to have about his situation has to be pretty off the charts.
Yeah. I mean, whenever I would first be hit with information or if I would have bad days, I'd get really angry, and I'm not an angry person at all. That's like the first point in my life that I just was mad. And I would take it out on him like sometimes on accident just because I was so mad at everything around me. And but he always did his best to make sure that I knew that he loved me, and like all of the energy he could give me, he would give it to me.
So he comes home from the hospital on January 19th.
Yeah.
You see him for the first time was it the first time in a year on January 20th?
No, it was the first time I had seen him in like a month and a half. Because
Okay.
I went back to the city in July of 2020.
Okay.
And so I was able to go and see him a little
In
bit.
spurts
here and
a little
there.
bit there. Okay.
Yeah.
But now when you see him,
Yeah.
you're on the clock at this point,
Yeah.
starting January 20th.
Yeah.
And when did he pass away?
He passed away February 6th.
And were you with him through that entire time?
I was.
And so just thoughts, feelings, emotions, what was that experience like?
Well, I went to see him January 20th, and we had some really bad days prior to going to see him then. Like I said, he was getting just sicker every single day, and so the communication was less. He was so just high on all the drugs they were giving him.
Right.
He was hallucinating a lot, and his brain was just kind of out of it. But I went to see him, and he was like so alert of everything that was going on. I was like the best day we had had in a while. And he wasn't sleeping. Like I fell asleep while we were hanging out, and I woke up and he's still awake watching a movie, and we were laughing at videos, and it was a great day. And so on January 20th, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. Like he's going to get better. This is going to be fine. Like I can already tell. And even he was telling me, he was like, I'm going to be fine. We're going to be fine. Like all of this stuff. And so I go back. He cried whenever I left, and he was like, I missed you so much. Like, please come back tomorrow. And I was going to I was going to go every other day. And I was like, okay, I'll come back tomorrow. So I call him the next day, and he's like, I'm really sick. Please don't come over. I don't want you to see me like this. Come over the next day. And I was just like, okay. And he slept all that day. We were on the phone, but he was fully asleep. Next day comes around, I call him, please don't come over. I'm still really sick, all of this stuff. And I was getting kind of frustrated with him because I was like, obviously we only have this amount of time. I don't care if you're sick or not. I don't care if you're throwing up. Like I want to be there because we only have this long. And so I basically had to give him a stern talking to, being like, listen, I don't care. I'm coming over. Like it's okay that you're sick. You're going to be sick. We know this. And so I ended up going over, and he was just so out of it. It was really bad. And he couldn't even keep his eyes open. Like he was asleep the whole time, basically. Yeah. And then I guess it was the next day, 2 days later, I go over again. And the second I walked into his room, I saw him, and I just started crying. And I knew. I called my mom, and I was like, he's not going to be here on Valentine's Day. You could just see it in his face. And so his eyes were fully closed, but he'd try and open them sometimes, but they were fully glossed over. I've never seen like a person like that. And also this was the first death I've really ever had to deal with. So what a great introduction. But yeah, it was really hard to see.
Yeah.
To see that.
What day did he die?
February 6th.
February 6th.
Yeah.
Is there was there anything from those last few days that you have kept with you, a good moment here or there?
Yeah, so he's a really funny guy. So it was February 5th. His mom, I've been telling her for days, take him to the hospital. He needs to go to the hospital because he wasn't eating, he wasn't drinking. At this point, he couldn't even like hold a cup. Like you had to fully do everything for him. And he was so out of it and hallucinating all the time. He was talking to some of his friends that had passed away in the Marines. Like I was in the room with him when he was talking to them. And so February 5th comes around and she finally takes him to the hospital. She tells me that it was probably like 6 p.m. that the doctors say he's not going to make it through the night. And I was like, okay, I'm coming over to the hospital. And she told me that they're not going to let me see him because COVID rules, you can't be in an emergency room. That's just how it is. You can have one person with you. And she was already there. And so I was like, I don't care. I'm going. Maybe I can cry in front of them and they'll let me in. We'll figure it out. So we figured it out, broke a lot of rules in the hospital. A lot of people had a problem with it, but they let me go back and see him. And they were just basically like, we don't know how long we can keep you here because the heads of us are really mad at us for letting you be here right now, so we might have to kick you out. And so his mom told me before I went back, she said, just letting you know, he's been in a coma, basically, the whole time. He's been completely unresponsive, so don't be surprised if he doesn't see you or talk to you or anything. Yeah. And I was like, okay. So I go back and I see him and I start crying. And his mom leaves the room for a few minutes. And I basically took this as like, okay, I need to say my last goodbyes now because I don't know when they're going to make me leave. So I start talking to him and I'm just telling him like all the things, like I love you, I miss you, like all this stuff. You're going to be okay. And his mom, right before his mom walks in, he squeezes my hand. And that's the first kind of response he's given anyone. And as she comes back in the room, he opens his eyes and he was like, you're here. He's like, I love you. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so his mom came in with the doctors and all of them were like, what's going on? Like, he's up? Like, he hasn't been up this whole time. And so I tried to talk to him a little bit and then he started to fall back into the coma. Well, then the doctor needed to come back in and check to see where his brain's at, to see like how long they think it will be. And so everybody's trying to wake him up. Bryce trying to get him up. Doctors can't get him up. His mom can't get him up. So they're like, you go try. You clearly can. So I go and sit beside of him and I start talking to him. And he sits up and starts talking to me again.
Wow.
And so they were like, okay, well, ask him some questions. And his mom was like, do you know where you are? And he was like, no, like, I don't know. The doctor said, you know what year it is? And he was like, 20. And she was like, all right, 20 what? He was like, 2022. And like everything he said had a lot of sass with it. She was like, I wish. And so then his mom was like, do you know who I am? And he was like, no, I don't know who you are. And I was kind of afraid to ask him if he knew who I was because I didn't want to hear, no, I don't know who you are. The doctors were like, can you ask him? And I was like, Yanni, do you know who I am? And he was like, of course I do. And I was like, okay, well, who am I? He was like, my girlfriend. And the doctor was like, what's her name? And he was like, Lexie Faith. Well, no, first he said, Alexandra Faith Gentle. That's my legal name. And I've only told him that one time. And he's just like being super funny. And so we were all laughing. And the doctors were like, well, he knows it, so that's good. And so then he like falls back into the coma and we're all talking, trying to figure out if they want to try and bring him back if he dies, like what he wants, all this stuff. And so my mom texts me, and it's about time for me to leave. My mom texts me and tells me to tell him that they love him and that they're going to miss him and all of this stuff, and that he'll always be a little. That's my parents' name. So I start talking to him, and the minute I was like, hey, my family, he opened his eyes. I was like, hey, my family texted me, and they want me to let you know that they love you. And he was like, aww. And I was like, no, they're going to miss you. And he's like, I'm going to miss them too. And I said, and no matter what, they said you're always going to be a little. And he starts dying laughing. He was like, that's so funny. I love them. And then my brother texted me. Sorry. My brother texted me and he was like, tell Yanni I said I love him. And my brother was 13 at the time. And I was like, Bryce says he's really going to miss you. And he was like, tell him I'm going to miss him too. And that I love him. And I was like, okay. And so I'm basically told that it's time for me to leave. And so I hug him and I like kiss him on the forehead. And I was just like, I love you so much. I'm going to miss you. And he was like, I'm going to be okay. And I was like, I know you will. He was like, are you going to be okay? And I was like, I'll be fine. And I was like, promise me you're going to come and see me and you're going to come and talk to me. And he was falling back into the coma at that point. And all he does is furrow his eyebrows. But he always did that when he said, of course. And so he furrows his eyebrows and I said, of course. He goes, yeah. And I was like, okay. And so he fell into the coma immediately. So I had to leave. And that was probably the hardest thing because I was like, I know if I were in this position, I'd want him here with me. And I can't be there. They won't let me. So I get in the Uber. I go home and I'm just dreading to fall asleep that night because I don't want to wake up to a text. I don't want to wake up to a call. Nothing. Next day rolls around. I wake up and there's nothing. And I text his mom and I'm like, is he okay? Like, what's going on? And she's like, he's still kicking it. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay. So I'm coming back to the hospital. So I go back the next day and they've moved him to another room, but it's a more serious room. He's gotten a lot worse, apparently. I get there, they're like, we are not letting you see him. We will not let you see him. Well, I convinced them to let me see him. So they said, you have 3 seconds. You can't touch him. All you can do is go in and say something, and you have to leave. And I said, okay. So his mom and his grandmother were in there. I go into the room, give them a hug, and they had said he'd been basically knocked out since I left. And so he was not brain dead at this point, but he had no idea of anything. And so I walk in, and I said, hey, Yanni, I'm back. And he opens his eyes again, sits up, and waves at me. And I was like, I love you. And he was like, I love you too. I've missed you. And I was like, I missed you too. And so there were so many doctors in there. And they were all just like, what the heck is going on? Like, how is this happening right now? And then they told me, they were like, all right, you have to leave. I'm sorry. And so I told them, I was like, all right, well, I have to leave now. And I don't think I can't come back. And I don't know if I'm going to see you again after this. So I was just like, I love you. Everything's going to be fine. I'm going to be good. Like, it's all good. And I was like, please just do whatever you need to do. And he was like, okay. And he was like, I got you. And I was like, all right. And I was like, I love you. And he was like, I love you too. And just out. He was gone. And so then I left. And luckily my mom and my grandmother had come into the city to be with me. So I went back to the hotel with them. And it wasn't until about 1 a.m. on the 6th that I got the call. So I guess that was the 5th and the other day was the 4th. Yeah. So, yeah.
So you're still 17.
At that point, yeah.
At that point.
Yeah.
What do you do next? How do you cope with this type of a loss at the age of 17? And how do you turn that into something that you can help others with? Next.
There's more of the new Ace at Large podcast next.
Hey, it's Ace, and right now when you bundle Killingsworth Termite Protection with Pest Control, you can save over $200 a year. Visit them at thebiggreenk.com. And remember, your family and home are Killings worth it.
Welcome back to the new Ace at Large podcast.
So, my new friend, I guess you could say our new friend, Lexie Faith is here. And she was just sharing this unbelievable story. At the age of 17, The love of your life dies a couple months ago. February 6th,
Yeah.
right? Okay. 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Good days, bad days, obviously. What's it been like since?
So the day it happened, I was told so many things to expect.
Yeah.
Like, you'll be sad, you'll be mad, whatever. You'll feel a sense of relief, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But I didn't think I would be okay. I thought I was going to be stuck in a hole and like not want to leave my apartment. I thought I was going to have to come back to North Carolina and be with my family. That's
Right.
what I expected. But right after I found out he died, I cried. But it was relief. It was a good feeling knowing that he's okay now. And obviously every situation is different, but because I saw everything he went through and I saw the amount of pain he was in daily, that basically helped me, and that made me able to continue whatever I was doing in my life and push through, because since you didn't get to live your life, I'm going to do what I can to live it for you, basically.
That's interesting. When I first heard about your story, and especially while you were telling your story, it's a hard question to ask, but I just wonder, I don't know if one's better or one's worse, but for example, when my daughter died, there was no idea that it was coming.
Yeah.
I saw her on a Tuesday night. She left. Last words I said to her were, "Got you first," which is what I said to her every day. I said, "I'll see you tomorrow." She
Right.
said, "Okay." She goes, "Sounds good. I love you." And got you last, she said, as she left.
Right.
And that was it.
Yeah.
Do you think it was easier to cope going forward because you did have this experience and had a chance to say goodbye, or not?
I honestly...
Sorry, you're holding it together much more better than I am. Right
No,
now.
it's okay. I don't think I know. I thought about that a lot whenever I was
Yeah.
given the timeline. I was like, this timeline sucked, but it's also a good thing because we know that it's coming. We know for sure
Yeah.
that it's coming. But also, we didn't know for sure that it's coming because miracles can happen. And I was just hoping. Every single night, I'm just hoping and praying we're going to get one of those. Something good is going to happen.
I can see that. I agree. I think there would always be the hope that, well, something could just miraculous could happen.
I was just basically like, everything has been so terrible. Please, you could just do one thing.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh.
So, God, there's so many questions. I feel like such a jerk for some of the questions that
No,
I've thought
go
of.
ahead.
Like, you just turned 18.
Yeah.
A career that has yet to even really begin. Broadway planning to reopen again, I guess, sometime this summer.
Really soon,
okay.
yeah.
You'll be going back.
Yeah. Well, so I stayed in New York.
Right. But I mean, you'll be going back to work, I guess. So your classes will pick up again.
Right.
All that kind of stuff will begin again in New York. Life in New York begins again. However, really the first time you've had as normal a life as you would have before you met Yanni.
Yeah.
Have you thought about that, what that will be like?
Whenever I thought about him dying, whenever we were given the timeline, or even prior to that,
Yeah.
obviously it was always a thought in my brain, like, this could go badly. Cancer kills a ton of people. It's a terrible thing. And so you can prepare yourself as much as possible, but there's no preparation for how you're actually going to feel whenever it happens. And so I was like, if he dies, I can't be in the city. I can't walk the streets and see everything that we had talked about, or I will never be able to go back to the park that we would always go to, or the Barnes & Noble, or the restaurants. Like, I was like, I won't ever be able to do that stuff. But that wasn't even the thing that scared me the most. What scared me the most was the fact that we talked on the phone all the time. So I was like, for months, for weeks, however long, I'm going to have to go on my phone and see his name and not be able to call that number. Like, that's not his number anymore.
Right.
I can't do that. And so that's what I was, like, mostly scared of. And, like, I had really rough nights. Randomly, right after he died, I opened my phone and his contact was just up. And I was just like, what? Like, why is this here? And so just little stuff like that would happen, and it'd just be a way of, like, in my brain, of him being like, hey, I'm here. I'm still with you. And I had, well, I find this really interesting, and some people may think I'm crazy if I say this, but that's okay. I don't know what everyone believes in, and I don't know if you believe in, like, how life goes after death. I don't know. But I believe in something of the sort of being able to come back and talk to the people you love, something along the lines of that, because I've experienced with it. So on January 5th at about, I don't even think I've told you this. I mean, in February 5th, I was laying in my bed in the hotel room with my mom and my grandmother. It was about like 12:30, I think. I just got this feeling in my heart that he needed me. I just got this feeling. It was like, I can't even explain it to you. And I just thought, okay, well, I'm just going to start thinking things that would, like, help him out. I can't be there with him in person. Maybe he's, like, sort of in a strange realm to where he can partly reach out to me, partly not. So I was like, I'm just going to start thinking things to try and help him move on, because he hadn't passed at this point. I'm like, clearly it's a difficult thing for him to do. And so in my head, I was just laying there thinking, I'm like, I love you. You're going to be okay. I promise you I'm going to be okay. Like, I just want you to get better. I want you to just go, and you will be fine. And I will be fine, I promise. And so those thoughts went on for about 15 minutes. And after it happened, I got this just gut-wrenching feeling. Like, the worst feeling I've ever had in my life. My heart just broke. And because of that feeling, I thought I should look at what time it is. And I look at my clock, and it's 12:45 on the dot. And I lay down to go to sleep. And at 1 a.m., I'm woken up by a call. And they're like, Yanni died. And I was kind of like, when? Like, did you just, like, forget to call me? Did this happen hours ago? Because I hadn't heard from them in like 6 hours. And they were like, no, he died like 15 minutes ago.
At 12:45.
And I was like, okay. That was just such an interesting feeling, and it was crazy. Yeah. And so then, like I said, I went and cried, only for a few minutes, and I was just kind of numb at that point. I didn't really know what was going on, and I was so tired. And I laid down, and I finally fell asleep, and I've never had a dream about him before, never. And that night, I dream about him, and I remember it vividly. It sounds crazy, but we're sitting, like, on clouds, if that makes sense. We're just, like, sitting together, and he looks like he did whenever he was healthy. And that's what I was like afraid that he was gonna, wherever he goes, he's gonna be like he is now in the current state that he was in. And that's the first time I'd seen him like that since before he had cancer, other than pictures. And he was like, hey, I'm here. He was like, I'm doing great. It's great here. Like, I feel so much better. Thank you for being here with me through everything, and I love you, and I miss you. I'm always going to be here. And it was just stuff like that, and it was very short. And then he was like, oh, sorry, I have to go. And like that, he was gone. And I haven't had another dream about him since.
Wow.
I every now and then will randomly open my phone, and like things will be open of him, or a song will play randomly. I'll start talking about something to do with him, and our song will play.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know.
So, two more things.
Yeah.
Going forward in life,
mm-hmm.
You just turned 18.
Yeah.
Have you thought about what life will be like long term? Will this affect your ability to, obviously, I'm sure it will affect your ability to, or how you approach dating in the future, getting married one day, all that
Right.
kind of stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
is that a concern? Is it a worry? Have you just put it off for now, worry about it later kind of thing?
No, it's definitely on my mind a lot. I think the biggest thing is being able to trust myself that I can actually be with someone else. Like, the last thing I would want to do is hurt someone else because I had convinced myself that I was okay to get into another relationship when I'm actually not.
Yeah.
But I think I have gotten to know myself very well in this whole period, and I've grown a lot as a person. So, yeah, I'm not too concerned about it, but it's definitely going to affect me.
Sure. And it'll be time when it's time.
Right.
I would imagine.
Yeah, and I also, whenever, like, right when he died, right before he died, I was like, I'm never going to date anybody else. I can't. Like, it's not even possible.
He doesn't want that.
And he told me, he was like, I want you to date someone else. He's like, obviously, I don't want you to just be alone. He's
Yeah.
like, that's so dumb. And, but I mean, in my head, I was like, I can't even think about it. I would just start bawling.
Yeah.
And then after it happened, I just kind of sat in my room and I was like, he's right. That is stupid. I'm like, you can't
Life
do
has
that.
to go on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, well, what if, like, how is everybody else going to feel if I start dating someone 6 months
Yeah.
after, a year after, however long? How are they going to feel? Are they going to be like, oh, her boyfriend just died and she posted all this stuff. How
Yeah.
dare she? And then I was like, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Nobody else knows how it feels. Nobody else went through the same thing. And I was like, honestly, I could waste 3 years of my life not trying to pursue any kind of thing. But it's going to hurt just as much starting it then as it would months later. It's going to be the same feeling.
That's a great point. At some point, yeah, it's not going to hurt any less whether you start living life again in 6 months, a year, 3 years, whatever. It's still going to hurt the same amount.
Yeah.
And I'm probably going to have a couple more questions.
Yeah,
What's the one thing that you would tell people when it comes to working through this type of a situation? Is there one thing that you've learned, or the lesson you've learned, or a coping mechanism that you would share and say, hey, this might be a little helpful piece of information for you?
So for me, I'm really into talking like this. I know different people like different things, but whether it was me having a therapy session with myself, recording a video on my phone, even if with no intention of posting it, it's just for me. It's getting it out there, but it's captured somewhere. It's there. It's not just out in the air and I don't know where it is.
Yeah.
It's right there. Or I would first try and write it down in my journal because I've been journaling for years now. But because this was so much for my brain to handle, I guess, journaling wasn't always the best way to go about it.
It's hard because you have to slow down to write it out.
Yeah.
And I do think it's funny you mentioned that, because I've said that 1,000 times on this podcast, is that there's something about getting it out of your body.
Yeah.
Hearing the words, it's like you're exhaling it out and pushing it away,
Yeah.
and you can feel that weight. But I've had the same experience. When you go to write, it's hard to write because you have to slow your mind down
Yeah.
to write the word, and I find that's a drag, and it gets frustrating, and then
does.
makes it worse, I guess.
Yeah.
When if I can just talk and have it captured in some form, you feel like, okay, that was good. I needed to get that out.
Right.
For a minute. That you have whatever personally it is, you have to find a way to get that out somehow.
Yeah, and it's not even just talking to someone. For me, I just need to know that it's somewhere captured and I can go back and look at it if I need to, whatever I need.
Absolutely. I think that, and what you said a minute ago is such a great point, that life has to go on. It's not going to hurt any less whether you wait 2 years or a year or 6 months. It's going to hurt the same.
Yeah.
So might as well get back in and get going again. Yep. So what happens now? What is the as far as Broadway, the career, the classes, all that stuff with the agency? What's the timetable that you're on now?
Well, I've still been auditioning.
So they are doing auditions now.
We're doing all submitted auditions,
Okay.
none in person at the moment. But I've been doing that like throughout quarantine, but there have only been a couple because there aren't as many things casting. And also I was 17 at the time, and on a lot of sets, I'm not legally allowed to be on the set.
Okay.
And they'd have to fill out a bunch of paperwork, and it's a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But now that I'm 18, I am hoping that things will pick up a lot more. I just had an audition the day before my birthday. That's a really coincidental story as well, stuff to do with Yanni. But I'm hoping that I'll get that job because I really want to work. But yeah, it's looking good. I have a lot of hope for it.
Well, good. I can't thank you enough for coming. I know it's not an easy story for you to share. It's still obviously extremely fresh, but I think there are some wonderful lessons in here that everybody can take with them.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate it very much. Thanks.
No problem.
This is the new Ace at Large podcast. The new Ace at Large podcast will be back next Thursday.